Welcome to Tisky Sour. I've been planning for this show to go live straight after the meaningful vote, May's third attempt to get her withdrawal agreement through Parliament. But after a dramatic day yesterday in which the Speaker of the House, John Bercow, ruled out Parliament hearing the same motion for a third time, MV3 was not to be. It's up for debate whether the Speaker overruling the Prime Minister on such a key legislative issue constitutes a constitutional crisis, but it most certainly is a sign of political chaos. So to talk through this pivotal moment in British political history, I'm joined by a journalist and writer who is consistently capable of taking the long view, especially when it's all kicking off. Welcome to the show, Paul Mason.
A pleasure, as always.
How are you doing?
Good. Frazzled.
Frazzled.
We're in the middle of the biggest political crisis ever, and nobody knows what's going on.
Whether or not this is the biggest or not is a later question. First of all, we're gonna stick to the details.
Yeah, let's do.
Was John Bercow sticking his neck out and saying the meaningful vote 3 cannot be heard because Parliament has already debated this question? Was that a risky move? There's already a big narrative in the country that this is a political stitch-up by elites trying to stop Brexit. So to stop Parliament debating in this way, do you think that was a mistake, potentially?
There is going to be that narrative, and as Brexit goes to shit, which is the technical parlance in political science, this narrative will rise. But I really don't think Bercow can be held at fault here, because what's interesting is that the era of King James I keeps influencing the Brexit crisis, because at the very start, the only reason we're having these meaningful votes is that Gina Miller, private citizen, took the government to court and won, and the judges in the Supreme Court, in one of the first ever judgments in the Supreme Court that actually made constitutional law in this country, because the Supreme Court's new, they said, since 1610, only the will of the people is only expressed in Parliament, so you have to have a meaningful vote. And that they quoted the Attorney General of the year 1610, and it's a remarkable kind of testimony to the time value of the rule of law, that if you establish it, then future people who always want to go back to the rule of law can always go back to it. So what Bercow did, he went back to 1604, again the first 2 years of King James I's rule, when what was clearly happening was the attempt by the nascent bourgeoisie of England to create a space for the creation of rule of law and constitutionality. And so both things have basically bitten May on the arse, as we say, because we do have a 400-year-old constitution that says you can't keep moving the same law again and again and losing it in Parliament. Everybody knew that. Now, what the real fault lies with is May. See, in Parliament, whenever you want to do something, it's possible to consult the Speaker. You go to Mr. Speaker's office, and he's got his whole retinue of people. And we know that for months, for example, this TIG group, this group of centrists that wanted to form itself, were constantly trying to find out what they could and couldn't do by consulting Bercow. Theresa May clearly didn't think it was necessary to go and consult Bercow. Hey, John, do you think you might rule this out of order? The assumption was that he wouldn't dare, because the next day, as we saw in the big British tabloids, the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Express, you're a traitor. But he has done so, and he has, for the first time, and it won't be the last time, taken the process of Brexit out of Theresa May's control. It was always on the cards that Parliament would, and I think it will eventually, seize the agenda. It lost by 3 votes last week, the attempt to seize the agenda, and so that MPs can move the order paper of Parliament. But before we even get there, her agenda has been seriously put out of joint. She was hoping to keep the clock ticking, meaningful vote after meaningful vote on the same issue. She no longer can, and it hands the European Union a weapon in the negotiations on Thursday, Friday this week, where they're going to say to her, look, you need to go to your Parliament with a new thing to even have a vote, so now you tell us what that new thing might be.
So that's up for debate, right? So the new thing could potentially be if Brexit date changes, right? So again, John Bercow has a lot of room for manoeuvre as to how he interprets it, but what it really comes down to is the numbers in Parliament. I mean, that's a long-winded way of going, what is going to happen next, So now she clearly has to go to Europe this week. Well, she sent them a letter today. She's asked for an extension. We don't know how long it's going to be, how long the extension she's asked for. Michel Barnier, for his part, has made clear that the EU will only grant an extension if Theresa May is clear as to what she wants to use it for. And we're very likely to see a vote in Parliament next week on meaningful vote. So it will be meaningful vote free, slightly different, but basically the same. And MPs will have a choice as to whether to go for a short extension or a long extension. But how do you see the next negotiations with the EU going?
Look, the first thing to say is that these negotiations have always been a contest. It's a battle between Theresa May trying to get her way and the European Union trying to get their way. And she repeatedly has just stymied her own ability to win through the strategy of trying to avoid any consensus with other parties about either the type of Brexit, the procedures for getting there. There's been no cross-party talks really, or no cross-party institutions at all created. So she said, I'm going to get it through with my votes, with the DUP, this nutty creationist 10-person group in Parliament, and the far right of the Tory party. That was her strategy, and because she clung to that strategy, the Europeans were able to defeat her again and again. And so at the end of the process, you're not in the sort of same position as you were at the beginning. You are in a weaker position. Now, what's happened effectively in the last 36, 48 hours is the further weakening of May's position, because now she, and the critical thing will be so she's going to write a letter, and on the news, all the political journalists who've been briefed are saying this. Number one, it's going to say, we are asking for an extension. So that is her latest climb down. Remember, all the climb downs that Labour have imposed on her, meaningful vote, she didn't want one. Citizens' rights for European citizens here, she didn't want to give them that. They gave it to them. Then, all the content stuff that Labour has pushed and pushed and pushed. And now, by simply just blocking her, she's run into the barrier of this Bercow ruling, the Jacobean intervention, and so she goes, I'm gonna ask for an extension, and I want a short one. And the Europeans will say, well, what for? And she'll say, so I can get my meaningful vote through. And they will quite rightly say, hold on a minute, your own speaker, who has constitutionality, so, we could, our speakers in our parliaments talk to him, says you can't do that. So and she says, well, I might need a longer extension. And the Europeans have in mind 21 months. That's the figure in their minds. And they'll say, you can have that, but you've got to do something, as Barnier says, spectacular. And no, I think she can get away with that, and I would like her to do that, precisely that, to say, the spectacular thing I'm going to do is consult the British people. Now, that can be an election, it can be a second referendum, on her deal or no deal or whatever. We can come to that in a minute. It could even be, and Macron's people have been saying in the background to her, it could even be citizens' assemblies. You just do what the Irish did. Have some citizens' assemblies. Just basically show that you are not sticking to this impossibilist position of trying to get this thing through, whether or not votes to get it through. So I think she goes into that meeting weak. However, she can once she comes out of it, she goes into the next week, which will be equally chaotic as this week, strengthened in the sense that she then has a new deadline. If she comes out of it with a new deadline of, say, May 31st, that is the no-deal Brexit day. That you can't go beyond it. And there would have to be a change of government, I think, or a collapse of government, which I think is entirely possible for the Europeans to reopen that deadline, because then you're in the EU but with no MEPs, no MPs in the Parliament, which is a de facto illegal situation.
So there's two things going on there. So in terms of the idea of you'd have to go consult the people, May would just presumably have to say, I will in some form consult the people, and then the European Union will say, okay, then you can have a 21-month extension. Or May's going to get in that deal, or if I manage to pass my withdrawal agreement, we'll only need to the 31st of May. So do you think the EU are going to be resistant to just give her that? Or
no, the next thing is, and by the way, as we speak, all these political journalists on the TV are trying to do this in 3 minutes with less analytical knowledge than me and you have. So what people are getting is like really kind of quite good public service analytical broadcasting here for nothing. Ka-ching onto the Navarra donation site. So she's not going to get. She's not going to get a short extension from the EU without an internal struggle inside the EU. And remember, the EU has several institutions. If only people understood that before we started this fiasco. One of them is the Commission. The leadership of the Commission are neoliberal centre-rightists. They are desperate for Britain to get out, to sign this deal and move on. Because the last thing they want, they've reallocated all the seats in the Parliament, making sure that they all go to nice places.
Just a ball ache if they stay after all this, right?
But even more importantly, they want a centralising European project. Juncker, who's the outgoing president of the Commission, says, I want a European nationalism, sort of Europeanism. And I think their predilection is to give her something to get us out. But the rest of the EU 27, and I've spoken to senior politicians in Germany and elsewhere about this, say, look, our project is Europe. If you're Spain, which endured excruciating austerity, or Ireland or Greece on behalf of the Eurozone, then what you do not want to see is Britain being given special favours at this point. And in fact, because they understand negotiations as a battle in a way that Theresa May clearly didn't, they can see yet another victory. So they go, look, all we have to do is sit it out for a week. And what do we have? Either then no deal, which is perfect for Europe, because yes, there'll be disruption, but the disruption will be major here in the United Kingdom, and then a negotiation will start in which the United Kingdom is completely weakened, and they'll dictate the terms of the ultimate deal. Or if no deal is avoided, you get a long position, in which case what they all want, which is much less disruption, is the soft Brexit. And I think that a 9 to 21 month delay would clearly produce a soft Brexit. It would produce possibly a new government, certainly a new Tory administration, because Theresa May will be out on her ear. And then they've got somebody to talk to about a Norway-style deal. So there's no incentive for the EU 27 to give May a special deal. There is a bit of a one for the Commission, because they're just keen to get it off the table. Remember, the new Commission will come in May, after when they're all reappointed by the governments. It will be probably a more right-wing and less Europeanist Commission. And I think they feel that they have this job to do on behalf of the Europe, the centrist neoliberal Europe, before it splatters apart under the influence of people like Salvini and Orban.
Now, there was just one thing you said about May will be in a stronger position next week, in a way, because she has a new deadline when no deal might happen.
Because if she gets a short extension of Article 50, if that goes to May 31st, the reason it goes to that is because after that, really, you have to take part. You'll have to have taken part in the European elections.
Do you think we will? Because there's been sort of different legal advice.
If we get a long extension, we will have to take part in the European elections. I would relish that. Yes, you wouldn't like for the first time Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party to stand in the European elections and say, no, whether you take your seats or not, on principle, I think that's an interesting debate, because you could say, look, we're waiting the outcome of whether we're leaving or not, but you take part in the elections and you go, right, for a social Europe, for a Europe of anti-racism and in defence of the Muslim minorities. All of that you could take right into the campaign, and of course nobody had any idea we could do that. We've all reconciled ourselves to this. The European election campaigns in Britain are really crass unless you're a right winger. Then UKIP always win, and it's always kind of people you've never heard of standing. But this could be quite exciting, and of course it would be incredibly charged and polarised. I would expect the far right in politics and also the kind of right-wing tabloids to try and stage some kind of preparatory boycott of it, because the far right, the ultra lunatic semi-fascist far right in Britain has already threatened to disrupt any second referendum. Now, in preparation for that, you could have the Mail and the Express saying, don't vote, anybody who votes a traitor. I mean, that will be very interesting. So I think that that my attitude is, for unlike some viewers of this program, my attitude is bring on the culture war in Britain. It's going to happen, and it started already. Just need to fight it.
You wouldn't be worried about a new far right, because the UKIP that would stand in this European election would be very different from the UKIP that stood in the last one. You'd potentially have Tommy Robinson on the list, and even if they don't perform that well, if he's high up on the list, you could easily have him as an MEP. Is that not well, one, is that not a situation that worries you? But two, do you not think it's a situation that worries the establishment enough that they will find some legal loophole that means they don't have to go forward with those
all
European
discussions
elections?
of Tommy Robinson have to be staged with the knowledge that it's no sub judice because he's now going to be tried again for contempt of court. So just to remind you about that. But of course, I fear the emergence of and the morphing of the far right in Britain. But we already know that there's a mass far right online. It's not a niche far right. And the forms it's going to take will just be dictated by what happens in the political struggle. Nothing that we can do can prevent it morphing into its ultimate existence. We need to take it on and defeat it. Now, I think that I would rather. The ultimate argument within the left, I think, and liberal intelligentsia in Britain is that this is unavoidable, and therefore sometimes you can't pick and choose your own kind of battlefield when you're fighting the far right. But in terms of the issue of, look, we're going to have the European elections. Do you want to be in them or not? It would be interesting to see whether they took part in them. I doubt they would, but if they did, then the immediate problem for them could. Because it's proportional representation. So if you get the votes, you get representation. Would be this Brexit party that's been set up by Farage. I know that the reason for setting it up was as a warning, as a kind of big stick against the Tories to warn them not to do what they look like they're now doing, which is an extension, and that the threat would always be, if you get an extension, we'll stand in the Euro elections. So again, bring it on for me, because what I want to see and what I think we will see in Britain is the fragmentation of right-wing politics. Between, if you look at the sort of liberal conservatism, the kind of born to rule conservatism, which is in total crisis because it was born to rule technocratically, a system that no longer works. And then you've got the right-wing nationalists, the kind of Thatcherites in one country, then the new UKIP, which is quasi-fascist, and then the Brexit Party, which is the remnants of sort of all the BNP and Blazers, which is what we used to call UKIP. Bring it on! I want to see them fight each other on the streets, because they will.
Yeah, but there's context, isn't there? So, I mean, I don't want to dwell on this point too long, but I suppose you're going to have to fight the far right electorally at some point. Yeah. But elections that are run on proportional representation with party lists, so a divided right isn't that damaging. And in the context of the most heightened our country is ever going to be in terms of a narrative of Brexit betrayal, are we not giving them the perfect electoral moment?
No,
Whereas if you just put off this European elections here and you take them on in a general election in 2 years' time or something, they won't get any seats.
Even if we were, it's not an argument for avoiding the long delay, because if you leave aside the party politics of it, no, there are only three functional outcomes to the present situation. Well, there are four. One, which I think is unlikely, May's deal goes through. You get this, and shortly after that, of course, Theresa May's Tory party will fall apart because that's the price of it going through. But more likely, you get a no deal. And no deal is likely because the German government and the other kind of, the Nordics, they're thinking, well, they have intelligence services. They have, they have their own version of GCHQ. They're not just relying on kind of guys in sort of, cufflinks and sort of silver ties going to cocktail parties in London, neither diplomatic service. They know that it's entirely likely that a no deal would happen.
When would I want just some clarification on this, because I feel like the media narrative has shifted since last week to no deal is off the table, at least for now. Theresa May stopped talking about no deal, but you still think it could happen?
Her plan is to create a no deal crisis in May.
Whose plan?
May's. Theresa May's. Yeah, because by asking for a 2-month delay, you get an absolute end to the process. As long as you've got this situation we're in, that yes, no deal is off the table and everything else is on the table. If you can say short delay and nothing else, you leave on the 31st of May, so decide what your deal's going to be, then you create the ticking clock again. So
you think she's just going to ask for 2 months? You don't think she's going to ask for two months or...
Well, she'll ask for 2 months, but she'll use the prospect of asking for longer as the big stick that she takes into Parliament next week to persuade the right to vote for her deal. But just going back to the functional outcomes, it's no deal, it's a short delay, it's a long delay, or it's no Brexit. That's what the functional outcomes are. And going back to, is it a good time to take on the far right? The thing is, the imperative is to avoid a no deal. For me, it's to avoid a no deal because it's an irreversible historic moment in British politics that nobody is ready for. Leave aside the 8% collapse in GDP, the chaos, small businesses. Go to your local garden centre. There won't be any plants. It's April. Apart from all that,
that's a very niche example there.
Well, it's a niche example because I met a load of garden centre owners, and when I was explaining to them, what will happen in a no deal, and really, like they took a lot of sort of getting up off the floor after I'd explained it to them. But more than that, most businesses, 2/3 of all businesses are tiny in Britain. They don't have any cash flow. They live on credit. They're desperate from one week to the next, and you're already seeing this dry up. So we must stop no deal. And so the price of stopping no deal is also, I'd say to the left, eyes on the prize here. For the first time today, right now, before we came on air, you've got May's spokesperson saying to journalists she now accepts the country has slid into crisis. Now, I think, because I know that spokesperson, if it indeed was the person I think it was, you're not supposed to name them, but I did once work with Theresa May's spokesperson, Robbie Gibb, and I could almost feel in his voice the kind of resigned sigh that at last my boss realises she's fucked it up. And so there is great things for us to play for here on the left, and I don't just mean for Labour or Momentum or Navarra. I mean for the progressive side of British politics. We could destroy this right-wing nationalist project forever if we stick to it.
I suppose, but I mean, do you think if you stop no deal, does that stop the right? I mean, that doesn't seem to follow.
It destroys the project because the project was.
They not just find a new project, but sort of enriched or enlivened by a new betrayal narrative. So they've got the betrayal narrative when it comes to no deal, and they can take it out on someone else.
Oh no, they will have the betrayal narrative for a generation. It'll be there. But demographics are all on the side of progress. Demographics are all on the side of people, even people who don't like the European Union or might even today wish for a kind of left-wing exit or couldn't give a shit about the whole thing. Generally, their values are going to be progressive values. And what is happening is that, as well, that we know, although there's a splintering of the pro-Brexit vote. 31% of people want no deal. Benicedly, they think that would give them greater sovereignty, but they will soon find out it gives them zero sovereignty because without a deal, trading with Europe simply dictates the terms. Yeah, but only so 31% is a lot, but that means the other 31 plus is the other 21 percentage points that gave us Brexit, either 51, 52, have begun to splinter. And we know from the research that unions and the left have done that these are working class women, Muslims, and young people, working class people, like in the C2D group. That's good, because that shows that by staying tough on the message of we don't like this Brexit, we're going to try and Labour, we're going to try and do one that's better for you, but ultimately, if it's not possible, we're not going to vote for one we don't like, it's probably the biggest psychological and intellectual shift in British politics that is completely unremarked on by the mainstream media because they're not interested in it. And they're not interested in its cause and consequence. The cause is Jeremy Corbyn. Right, a left-wing Labour Party able to say we'll stick by this vote, but we'll do it a different way with credibility. And the consequence is, i.e., the consequence of the splintering of the vote, is that it leaves the Conservative project very tied to an impossible thing, which is economic nationalism in a world of global chaos. I think I constantly try to stand back from the dust, and because it won't settle. You can't wait for it to settle and understand things. The dust will be in our faces. You can stand back from it a bit. That's how I see it. I see a 2-year process of trying to win back those who voted, for whatever reason, for Leave, towards a more social orientation. I think that's clearly happened. Now, whether they would love to remain, I don't know, but they're clearly not liking what was on offer. And you get so many people now saying, I want it over with. That's quite, when somebody starts saying, I want all this over with, it's not a positive feeling. It's like having your tooth out. No, they didn't think it was going to be like having your tooth out, like a 2-year process of extreme pain in your jaw. But now they've realised it is.
So I suppose what you're describing is a sort of splintering of the reactionary from the non-reactionary section of the Leave vote.
Well,
and the non-reactionary section
even,
hasn't necessarily gone to Remain.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even use the words reactionary. I think the Leave vote, Leave was clearly the project of the xenophobic, racist and misogynist right in Britain. There's no doubt about that. But it dragged people into it because of real grievances that it's not so, I hate it when Labour people say, we have to acknowledge you had a grievance. No, that was my grievance. The use of poorly paid migrant workers to, whether or not technically. There is a case, of course, that wages were suppressed in some sectors by that. But it was not just that. It was to break up citizenship. It was to break up the idea of community cohesion. Suddenly, there are 3 million people who can't vote. 3 million strong section of the working class that doesn't have the vote. The bourgeoisie of Britain has dreamed of that for years. Suddenly they got it. And people said, I don't like this. Okay, I'm glad they didn't like it. I'm only sorry we couldn't persuade them to reform Europe. I don't want them to lessen their critique of Europe, but in other words, it's a battle for the minds of people who are not necessarily reactionary at all, but certainly culturally are not enamoured in the way the sort of classic urbanist, educated FBPE person on Twitter is. And I don't see them as a dead loss at all for Labour. I actually, for me, the progressive project in Britain for a generation is creating an alliance of those forces around something new, I see this. It's been awful actually to watch Labour have to simply just grind through party discipline and almost like sometimes illogical kind of refusal to engage with argument and just say we're not going to do this, we are going to do this. It's been not a pretty sight.
So what should they do? What have they done wrong, and what should they do differently?
Well, in terms of Labour, the critique I would have, there's this facile critique that said Corbyn always wanted Brexit. He was a Bennite, he hated Europe, therefore he's conniving with the Brexit. I think it's totally wrong. Yeah, it's not. There's no basis in fact for it. What is true is that Corbyn had to deal with, and still has to deal with, a variety of forces inside Labour, and now. Some of them simply express what I just expressed, the justified critique of Europe as a neoliberal project with, marginal impacts on wages, but big impacts on through migration on, stress on local services, not enough money for those services, and also the idea of citizenship and community. Right. Well, that is bound to find its way into the political discourse through MPs who are close to it, especially if they are ideologically predisposed to it. So you've got Blue Labour. Maurice Glassman is not an MP, he's a Labour peer, he's a senior lawmaker, the equivalent of our Senate, unelected. He wants a no-deal Brexit because he has this project of socially conservative Labour. But on all of the things, I would ally, many other things I would ally with him. And then you've got people like Lisa Nandy, the Wigan MP. Now, I'm from next door to Wigan, and I'm going up there indeed quite soon to do some fundraising with Lisa. But I kind of understand that what the problem she faces is civil society in a town like this is at this end of the pub, my mates in Momentum, ex-miners, arguing for socialism. At the other end of the pub, another load of ex-miners who are quite frankly embroiled in xenophobic narratives, without wanting to say what they say. It is not very pleasant. And they're just at the other end, two ends of the pub, sometimes shouting at each other, always arguing, always having to live alongside each other. My friend who literally I'm talking about made a broadcast the other day that said, thanks to neoliberalism, I now have to live alongside working class fascists and I can't escape. Now, what's the problem? The centre barely exists. Of course there are teachers, doctors, lawyers in a place like that, but politically the extremes are strong. And I can see what Lisa is saying, look, I've got to represent what my constituency thinks. But in the end, what's been good about what Labour's done, so you asked me what was bad, what's been good is that by making the not very pretty compromise with people like Lisa Nandy, they've destroyed the Tories' unity. They've actually ground them down. However, what the price of it, so it's not a question of right, wrong, it's a question of price. I think they've paid a very high price, Labour, the Labour front bench, Corbyn, not only in people now saying he's just another politician, because you can remedy that by new gestural sort of dramatic things that you do. believe we, the left, can only win on a positive story, the narrative of hope. And the narrative of hope has to be expressed in very clear terms around values. And what we can't do is triangulate with the reactionary values. And so while somebody like Lisa Nandy I would respect, I've got loads of other people in the PLP who are basically saying, I can't face my own constituents. And I can't face going down the pub or being on the doorstep, listening to a torrent of racism and xenophobia anymore. They just love it to all be over. They're the other, it should all be over crowd. And that's what's wrong. You can't have, I see this struggle, Brexit, as a part of the class struggle. The same way as I see, say, the Catalan national struggle as part of the class struggle, or the Irish struggle for a united Ireland as part of the class struggle. There's this tendency within the Labour movement that says, that we hate these political questions. We want to get back onto the issues of homelessness, food poverty, the health service. And you can't. And so those Labour MPs are just trying to dodge the issue. They might be lucky, and Theresa May destroys herself. Or they just delivers Brexit, and there's nothing we can do about it. But as long as there's something we can do about it, the Labour movement, we ought to oppose it. And we ought to oppose it like Ocasio-Cortez opposes things, or Tlaib and Omar in the American Congress, with values, with fuck you. Look at my face. We are a multi-ethnic nation. We are progressive people. We are feminists, blacks, gays. We can't give you any compromise. We can't bring the world of Coronation Street, 1965, back to you. But here's what we can do. Here's a ton of money for your maternity ward, for your local library, for your school. Now, and some on the doorstep, you might have seen it as well. Some say, I'd rather the economy go to shit and all the migrants go back. But some don't. And I think we're only going to be able to have that argument in the same way as AOC and Sanders do from the heart. And that's what I think's been missing from Corbyn's dialogue and everybody and most of the Labour front bench. Here's what we stand for. But I think if we can defeat her in Parliament, we can actually get back on that front foot quite quickly. Because actually the other thing is, it's a sad thing. Most of this is going on in the top 2 inches of British politics. Most people don't even know. I'm really sorry. Most people don't even know what me and you are talking about. They're not.
Well, even when I'd be really interested to see the BBC's ratings, because like when you watch half an hour of the news and it's all about the backstop, and you're like, I barely care about the backstop, and I'm like pretty in the know in terms of politics. I don't know how this is sort of being viewed by everyone else in the country.
You know what's interesting to me about this, having been a mainstream media reporter for the BBC and for Channel 4, I'm sickened by the total lack of proportionality in the reporting. We are living through a constitutional crisis, and most of the political reporters are treating it like a joke. If Corbyn wears the wrong hat at the wrong ceremony, it's like a 10-minute diatribe. He's in he doesn't. It's all the value judgments in the language are, the guy's useless, he's fucked it up, he ought to, the implicit thing is he ought to go, time to go, magic grandad, all that. But Theresa May has just destroyed the British Constitution, and you get these kind of funny segments where people go, yes, it's on the one hand, on the other hand. There's a total lack of engagement with the drama of this situation by the political reporting class, because they know their world is one step from destruction. Corbyn comes, Theresa May falls, Theresa May falls, the Tory party fragments, Brexit is averted or radically softened, end of the right-wing politics in Britain project for a generation, Corbyn in power, goodbye the world that you thought was permanent. And it's so obvious when you see it and listen to it in the subtext of what these journalists say. And of course, if it's subdued on the broadcast media, it's huge out there in the print media. Virtually, I still write for the Guardian, but the whole narrative of the Guardian is, please don't let our world die. Corbyn could be in power this year, and if he is, that's the first major country with a nuclear weapon and the remnants of an empire and a major intelligence and security service that has gone to the left. And I can't wait for it. And that's why I will, actually, you asked me for my critique of Corbyn, I'd still say I will endure all kinds of tactical disagreements with him and the people around him to get that.
I mean, I suppose to push on something that I think probably the audience of Novara Media will have the most doubts about, this idea that Brexit should be viewed through the lens of a class struggle.
Yeah.
So I think the way I've looked at it, and the way many people on the left have looked at it, is the Brexit disagreement is a disagreement between two factions of the Tory party, between elite neoliberals and sort of nationalists.
Yeah.
And that it's not. I mean, for me, it's not necessarily tied up with an anti-racist struggle. So I think
No.
an anti-racist struggle is part of the class struggle. But is our constitutional or our trading relationships with the EU really an element of the class struggle?
Well, the first thing you have to say is that this was the argument that Lenin had to have in the famous argument with the economists. Lenin said, look, there was a group called the Economists. They weren't economists, but they were in favour of economic struggle inside the Russian Social Democratic and Labour Party.
In favour of economism, right?
Well, what they said is like, look, the liberal intelligentsia wants a constitution. They're having all these banquets. We're not invited to the banquets. What do we care whether there's a constitution or a czar? They're the bourgeoisie. They exploit us. They own all the factories. So, as they said, let's leave politics to the liberals. Now, in a way, there's a tendency within Labour which is subcutaneously said, leave people's vote to Chuka Umunna. Or if Paul Mason's involved, why is he involved? Because that's straying away from pure economic struggle. Well, and Lenin had a word, he used the German term, nur Gewerkschaftlerei, only trade unionism or pure trade unionism. And he criticised it. Now, I'm not a Leninist anymore, I was once, but he was right on this, that the national struggle can be part of the class struggle, the struggle for a constitution, and actually to remember what the Brexit struggle was before we won a series of things. There was a danger at one point with all the momentum of that vote in June 2016 that Theresa May would actually say, or whoever became Tory leader, that we're going to leave Europe and in the process we'll rip up all the European laws that are currently embodied inside UK law. And the struggle was to say no, because if we do that, we create a free fire zone for neoliberalism. I also think that I don't want to side with any faction of the Tories, but I do think that the breakdown of the global order and the rise of the far right means that, I've said it overtly, the main enemy is no longer the neoliberal centre. The main enemy is the xenophobic and nationalist right. And if one is required to ally tactically with the neoliberal centre, you have to do it. Now, that doesn't mean supporting Macron, battering people on the streets with the CRS riot police. It means fighting him, and sometimes fighting alongside people who are de facto right-wingers. In the Gilets jaunes, I would be on the street with the Gilets jaunes critically and trying to organise a left presence within it. But when you look at something big, like should we break up the global system and cause chaos into which Steve Bannon can insert all his millionaire money and agency, I would say no. And we have a combined. We have a joint interest with the remnants of the liberal centrist bourgeoisie in defending and reforming a multilateral global system. Now, I know that is actually the argument on the left, because especially in America now, Thomas Fazzi, Bill Mitchell, you've got economic nationalism. I would argue that the MMT theorists are effectively economic nationalists who stand behind the Green New Deal.
And in Europe, it'd be Wolfgang Streeck, right? So someone who argues to return to social democracy, you have to return to national democracy.
Streeck is one. All the parties in the party of the European left, the left communist parties, the KKE in Greece. No, I don't. Excuse me. I don't write off the arguments, because we are going to. The next step for the left in Europe is to pull away from a neoliberal multilateralism towards greater control at national level. Now, this, in fact, although Mélenchon is repeatedly condemned as a nationalist, an economic nationalist, all he's actually arguing for is a form of subsidiarity. It's bringing control to the nation states, but you still keep the multilateral system. Now, i.e., there is the European Council is 27 nation-state heads of government, and they were all democratically elected, apart from in Hungary, which is a quasi-democracy. But you're not necessarily having to argue for the breakup of the system, excuse me, in order to pull it closer to the democratic control. The other thing is, the reform of Europe, which will have to go on whether Britain's in or out, has to. has to fill the gap between the nation-state democracy and sovereignty and the pan-national sovereignty, which has been deliberately created. And this is a free fire zone in which corporations work. The fact that there is no unified tax structure in Europe allows them to play the tax rules. Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, to emerge as tax havens within the system. If you shut that down, what is that? More nationalism, more internationalism? It's simply the rule of law applied to Europe and a clarity about sovereignty that doesn't exist in Europe. Excuse me. But so, yeah, I think I want to accept a lot of the reasons that are driving the kind of proto-economic nationalist left towards their conclusions, because we do have to remake the multilateral system, and the reform will feel like a revolution. If the European Union broke up Facebook and established technological sovereignty for Europe and its citizens over Facebook, it would feel like a revolution. I'd rather do it at this. This is my argument with the Lexiteers, that I'd rather do that with Europe than do it against Europe, because against Facebook, Britain on its own, with the elite that we've got, is going to be much less powerful than a Europe that is technically already committed to things like GDPR, the data protection registry, and to, it's growing. There is a growing mood now inside Brussels to really heavily regulate Facebook or even break it up. And so I'd rather do that at a European scale. So what I'm saying to the proto-economic nationalist left is your nationalism doesn't solve the problem. And with Streeck and Co., I think they make dangerous concessions, as Glassman does, to the cultural aspect, which is a different thing. You could be quite progressive politically and still be pro-economic nationalism.
But they slide into sort of cultural nationalism as well at times.
Well, I wouldn't accuse them of cultural nationalism. But I would say that what there is that there's a nostalgia. The root of it all is like an argument about agency. There's a nostalgia, which you mentioned at the very beginning in my book, Why It's Kicking Off Everywhere. That and post-capitalism, and the one that's coming out in May, Clear Bright Future, are all effectively riffs on the who is the new agent of history. Yeah. And as you know, I've argued that it is the networked individual, and that the networked individual is a kind of sublated version of the working class whereby, above all in Germany, on the German left, only the blue-collar proletariat is seen as proletarian. It's an argument even to get them to admit that a teacher is proletarian. But worse than that the old, culture of family, tightly knit society, exclusionism, implicit solidarity, got us so far in working class history, but it won't get us any further. And to me, the new culture of the networked youth, of the salariat, of the educated workforce, a lot of workers working in companies where saying something from a UKIP leaflet would be a sackable offence. And that's good. It means that the global corporate system is actually more progressive than, in some ways, than the society they come from. And the point of that is that's because they have all these companies don't have like political correctness rules because they want to. It's because black people, women, gays, lesbians fought for them. And so my critique of people like Streeck is that they don't value that. They see it as a retreat from solidarity, where I see it as an advance for solidarity.
I'm about to take your questions. We've got 15 minutes left. As you know, we are a crowd-supported media organisation. This is only possible because of your subscriptions and your donations. If you already donate, if you already subscribe, thank you very much. You are what makes this possible. If you don't, you know that our ask is for the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. So to subscribe, please go to support.novaramedia.com. We have 1,300 people watching.
Yay!
But I want it to get higher. We want it to get up to 2,000. So make sure you share this. Make sure you like it so it appears higher up in people's news feeds. And make sure you subscribe to Novara Media so that you can get a notification every time we go live. As you know, Tysky Sour is every night at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. That's the one thing I should be able to remember. But sometimes we do emergency shows if there is an emergency.
We might have to do a few emergency shows.
We might have to do a few of those, in the very near future. So, give me your questions whilst they're appearing. How would you have an argument for European reform, but for me, the Another Europe is Possible line of Remain and Reform has always seemed very abstract. The idea that there's often what people say on Twitter is, if Alistair Campbell gets given the campaign, we'll lose again. You need to give it to Another Europe is Possible. I've never been convinced they'd be any better at making that argument. And that's not me calling them incompetent. That's just me saying I don't actually think this Remain and Reform argument has that much traction.
No, I mean, look, the concretisation of it is this: you've got to rewrite the essential treaties of Europe, Lisbon and Maastricht. You've got to remove from Lisbon the inbuilt neoliberal, or as the Germans in the German version, ordoliberal economics that says competition is better than state ownership, state aid is impossible. All the ECJ as an institution has consistently ruled in favour of bosses against workers, I would argue. So as an institution, its culture is pervaded by this neoliberal culture. So the judiciary would have to be reformed. And then Maastricht, which imposes austerity and deficit limits. America's growing at 3.9%. Its deficit is about the same. Basically it's deficit-funded growth, job creation on a vast scale. Europe's still stagnating. And the Germans were asked, would you change this? Macron said, let's change it. Macron now says, even Macron, I'm prepared to reopen the basic treaties. And the Germans are saying no, because for Germany, the Eurozone is a giant economic game. So, Eurozone delivers near zero unemployment in Germany and stagnant growth, and a crumbling infrastructure, and 25% unemployment in Spain and slightly better growth at the moment, but not good. And until Germany and France are prepared to give up the respective games, it's not going to be reformed. But at least now you've got when the guy with the riot police and the guy on the streets fighting the riot police, Macron and Mélenchon are both calling for the rewriting of the European treaties. You'd have to say there's a bit of a chance of it happening. And that's what reform means for me. It's nothing less than I go to Europe and these social democrats go, Paul, how could we replicate what Jeremy Corbyn's done? I say, well, Jeremy Corbyn doesn't have a copy of the Lisbon Treaty in his head. You do. Rip it up. And that's what they really find that very difficult. But that's what we're going to have to do.
So the Strake argument, to be his defender, is that that's impossible because there can never be a European demos, and capitalist interests are much better at lobbying on a transnational level than
look, he might be
trade unions, etc.
He might be right, but in that case, what do you do? I mean, in that case, the project of socialism is screwed anyway.
In a globalized world, etc.
But even I'd be in favour of taking some. This is how I would do it. A Labour government comes to power. You take some state aid measures. You rewrite company law. You sideline all the competition rules. Nationalise this, that, and the other. The energy system, and of course the Europeans go crazy. But you then say, look, well, right, we've done this for a reason, and you deliver growth. One of my big fears in the next 2 years is that Trump will win because growth is so strong. And Trump, it's often, Michael Moore points this out, Trump doesn't just spend on arms, doesn't just kind of spend on the largesse to his family and the rest of it. Trump has given the go-ahead to every increase in welfare that Nancy Pelosi has asked for. You can do this if you're prepared to run a deficit and a massive debt, and Europe isn't. And guess what? The world is now Europe, Russia, China, India, and America. And i.e., the big powers, it's only Europe that's strangling itself. I think that the history is on the side of those of us who want to reform it. And even if we're outside it, we'll be in something like the single market or a customs union, we're going to have to reform it from without. So I'd rather reform it from within.
I suppose on a conversation about how to create a European demos, Danny Blackwell has asked, what do you both think about Varoufakis's DM25 and European Spring movements? I should also add he's put hashtag Euroshanley, Max Shanley for MEP. I wholly endorse that.
That would be
part
fantastic,
of it.
Wouldn't it? There's a dream team of RC MEPs. If Labour were to stand, Max would be great. But it should be probably all women. That's what it should be. So You know, if I was still supple enough to actually demonstrate a headbang on this desk, a face plant, that would be my reaction to DM25. Because, you know, in Germany, where Yanis is standing, you know, on what basis against the left party and against the left of the Social Democrats, who are desperately trying to evolve?
I didn't even realise that. So Yanis Varoufakis is standing in Germany against the German left parties?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think while DM25 is, you know, what the premise of it is, and we've got till 2025 to reform Europe, and then we give up on it. I mean, I interviewed him live on stage in Camden or Islington a couple of years ago, and he said, like, in his mind, he'd already admitted that the pessimism of the intellect meant that, you know, it wasn't really going to be possible to do it in that way. Also, look, I think the Green New Deal thing that he's produced is good, but I've got great respect for Varoufakis, actually, as a thinker and an economist. But having observed him close up as a political operator, I think he's not a very effective one. And I think that DM25 has been effective in places where there isn't really a strong left, like Croatia. It's managed to pull in people like Razum from Poland, who are a good party, I think, are good, progressive, got great positions, especially important in Poland on anti-racism, abortion, etc. But we need an international, and the M25 should bring those forces that it's got with it. I mean, I struggle to forgive them for endorsing Nick Clegg, the architect of this austerity. They endorsed Nick Clegg in the last election.
The M25 endorsed Nick Clegg.
You can get your fact checkers to check this, but I'm pretty
Christ.
sure that because the idea was we endorse a range of progressive people.
Yeah. Oh, because they're pro. It's that whole sort of like the united front in favour of the EU.
Yeah. So look, the substantive point is we need a functioning international, and the real problem is that the radical left in Europe doesn't function as an international because Tsipras can't sit down in the same room as Mélenchon because Mélenchon's trying to kick him out of the European left. The Nordics, who are, to me, are the best part of the European left, alongside Podemos. They are rooted in what you might call, you know, the modern world, the modern life, the networked individual. They barely can stand sitting in the room with the more communist kind of, you know, sort of economic nationalists. And as a result, left social democracy and social democracy itself is far more, and the Greens are far more clearly organised on an international scale, and the far right is utterly organised in a mimetic way. We're not. And I don't think DM25 does much to solve that problem.
Interesting. We've got lots of difficult questions which involve odds.
Leon,
you've got 2 minutes for this one. So Leon Cardoso, odds on a general election, please.
25%. I do percentages.
How likely is a Norway-style Brexit in the next few years? That's from Craig Dobson.
I'd say a Norway-style Brexit as the proposal in the next 6 months has a 40% likelihood.
40%. They've got to add up to 100 in the end. Frank.
No, it doesn't.
Probabilities do have to add up to 100.
No, because they're different. You're asking me. There's a 4-to-1 chance of getting. There's a sort of.
Oh yeah, because you could have a general election and Norway-style Brexit. Sorry. Yep, you're right. From Frank, hi. What are the chances of the EU not granting an extension?
Low.
Good. This is from Phil Burtledge. Oh, I've forgotten his bloody name, but Avery a very public sociologist.
All right, I always read it as
it's
Avery.
A great blog.
I don't know why. Yeah.
Avery PS is how it comes up on the thing. What's the best play available to Jay Corbs to help along the split in the Tories?
The play.
Yeah. What can Corbyn do to best
provoke
a split in the Tory party?
I could even finish on this. My fear has been that 20 or 30 Labour MPs will at the very moment rebel and vote with Theresa May because they say and it's not just the kind of what you might call Lisa Nandy sort of rooted in working class leave areas. People, even Jess Phillips said at the end, I'm prepared, who's kind of seen as more of a Blairite, I'm prepared to vote with Theresa May to avoid catastrophe. Now, the worst thing is to either by design or even worse, by accident, to give them the idea that they're allowed to do it. And I have worried that there are people who kind of would quite like to do that in the Labour front bench, to give that signal. Go ahead, you save us. We vote against Brexit. You betray us. You know, we forgive you. Brexit's passed. We can get on with it. And the best thing that Corbyn can do is actually what Corbyn, MacDonald and Keir Starmer, because they are almost like the three powerful leaders now of Labour, is to go on, making it very clear that that is not the plan. The plan for us, ourselves in the left, is to defeat May's Brexit because it will shatter conservatism.
Sorry, this sometimes happens. Will Brexit chaos precipitate a ride in support for Passadism?
You mean
UK?
You mean Passadism, not Pujardism?
Passadism.
Passadism
that's
is
communism
Passadism
by
is,
nuclear.
Passadism was a strange form of Trotskyism in the 1970s and 80s, which believed that if we ever made contact with people from outer space, they would be communist because they had to be a higher civilization than us. The workers' bomb thing, which is what people think it is, many parts of Trotskyism and of course all of Stalinism wanted a workers' bomb. And I don't call Britain's nuclear weapon a workers' bomb. It's a bourgeois bomb. It's just that I'm in favour of dismantling it through multilateral disarmament rather than unilateral.
Interesting. All right, good. Next Tory leader.
Oh no.
That's difficult, isn't it? Actually, I suppose there's a way of framing that, which is more in terms of what's currently going on than just a stab in the dark at who's it going to be. What faction do you think is on the rise? And
what is going
on?
There's 4 people in the cabinet who are Liberal Tories who can see that May's over, and they don't want to have their hands on the catastrophe. Amber Rudd is their leader. She cannot become leader of the Tory party because not only do most MPs subscribe to the kind of doomed neoliberalism or the nationalism, but the members, it's been invaded by the ex-UKIPers. You know, somebody was telling me the other day about a Tory MP who his members voted 19-1 for no deal, and my joy at the floor, not because of the result, but because only 20 people were at the constituency party meeting. So the forces of liberal Toryism are not at those meetings. So what I would say is it's a straight fight between Javid, who's going to be the martinet, kind of. Me and you are neo-fascists, according to Sajid Javid, but actual fascists. He can't lift a finger, doesn't need notice when they rampage down Whitehall. It's either him or the avatar of the nationalist right, which is going to be Johnson. Johnson is.
He doesn't get the nominations. I thought that's the whole point, right? The membership is sort of irrelevant if he can't get into the top 2 from the Tory party.
Well,
MPs.
Johnson keeps writing these semi-autobiographies that turn out to be biographies of Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill was, as his real biographer said, a study in failure until the moment where, in a crisis, he stepped forward. And I'm sure that's what Boris Johnson thinks he's going to do. In a crisis, he's establishing his right-wing credentials with all these anti-Muslim dog whistles, Islamophobia and racism and sexism, and even weird comments about child abuse. He's doing all that now in order to be the candidate that unites that, the kind of Daily Mail reader down the pub with the liberal Tories in the end, which is where he comes from. He's part of that kind of old Etonian world.
Brilliant. Time is up.
It turned into a kind of crystal ball game.
Always a pleasure. Yeah, it's best when it's a crystal ball game. Phil BC is in the comments complaining that I've got his double-barreled second name wrong, but he still hasn't told me exactly what it is. So to make up for that, follow @PhilBC3 on Twitter.
Well, one of them could be bourgeois, and the other one could be something we're not going to say. What is it?
Who is he?
Phil BC. Who is Phil BC?
He does the blog, A Very Public Sociologist.
Him? Well, I know who he is. Yes, I know.
But I can't work out. Never remember what the B and C is. It's Bert something. Put it in the comments. Anyway,
he's a very good public sociologist.
Always a pleasure, Paul.
Yeah, and a pleasure to Navarra as well.
We need to get you back in every time there's a crisis.
Send money now. Send money now to Navarra. We're going to go. They're going to need to be 24-hour broadcasting.
Exactly.
On College Green.
If you want to take Paul's advice, which normally I recommend you do go to support.navarramedia.com and donate some money. As you know, we recommend 1 hour's wage a month so we can continue working around the clock, which is going to be more and more necessary. Burton Cartledge.
Hi, Phil.
It's appeared in the comments.
Hi, Phil.
I blurred the two. All right. See you next week. Same time, same place. Good night.